My name is Madison Taylor, 32 years old, and last month I found myself staring across a courtroom at my father, a man who walked out when I was 8 and suddenly wanted back into my life, specifically into my bank account. After 24 years of silence, he was demanding millions from my tech company fortune. The judge's face turned completely pale when I revealed the truth about our past. My father, usually so smug and confident, went silent for perhaps the first time in his life. Before I tell you how my words silenced the courtroom and left the judge completely stunned, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop a comment below, hit subscribe, and let me know if you've ever had to stand up to family in court. I grew up in Mapleton, Indiana, one of those small Midwestern towns where everybody knows everybody. My childhood home was a modest two-bedroom house with faded blue siding that my mother Grace had inherited from her parents. Until I was 8, our family seemed normal enough. My father Richard worked in construction, my mother was a part-time bookkeeper at the local hardware store, and I was just an ordinary kid who loved math and computers more than dolls. The day everything changed is still vivid in my memory. I came home from school to find my mother sitting at our kitchen table, eyes red from crying. Dad had left. No warning, no goodbye, just an empty closet and a brief note saying he needed to find himself. At 8 years old, I couldn't comprehend what that meant, only that he was gone. What I didn't know then was that he had emptied their joint bank account, taking nearly $12,000, all of their savings. My mother kept this from me until I was much older, trying to protect me from the harsh reality of his betrayal. The weeks following his departure blurred into months, then years. No calls, no birthday cards, no child support payments. My mother filed for divorce, but he never showed for the proceedings. The courts granted it by default, along with an order for child support that was never enforced because he couldn't be located. My mother Grace was suddenly a single parent with a mortgage bills and a young daughter to raise. She picked up additional shifts at the hardware store and began cleaning houses on weekends. I would sometimes tag along helping her dust or vacuum, watching her exhaust herself just to keep our lights on and food on the table. My grandmother, Eleanor, my mother's mother, became my after-school caretaker. An elegant but practical woman who had lived through the Great Depression, she instilled in me important lessons about financial independence. Never depend on anyone else for your security, Madison, she would tell me, pressing quarters into my palm for my piggy bank. A woman must be able to stand on her own 2 feet. By the time I was 12, I had started my first business, a neighborhood lemonade stand that evolved into a lawn mowing service, then babysitting. I saved every dollar I earned, keeping meticulous records in a notebook with multiplication tables on the back cover. When other kids were spending their allowance on candy and toys, I was adding to my savings account that Grandma Eleanor had helped me open at the local credit union. High school brought both challenges and opportunities. My mother developed early onset arthritis in her hands from years of physical labor, then diabetes that required expensive medication. Insurance covered some costs, but not all. I took on more hours at my after-school job at the local grocery store, stocking shelves and running the register. My grades never suffered, though I was determined to get a scholarship to college, understanding intuitively that education was my ticket to a better future. I graduated as valedictorian of Mapleton High School, earning a full academic scholarship to Indiana State University. My mother and grandmother sat in the front row at graduation, both crying happy tears. I scanned the audience briefly, still harboring that childish hope that my father might appear for this milestone. He didn't. As a first-generation college student, I chose to study computer science, fascinated by the emerging tech industry and the logical precision of programming. College wasn't easy. I was surrounded by students whose parents had paid their tuition, bought their laptops, and funded their social lives. I continued working part-time at a local tech repair shop, learning practical skills while earning my degree. It was during my sophomore year that I met Amber Williams in an advanced programming class. We were 2 of only 5 women in a class of 40 students. Amber was brilliant, driven, and shared my passion for cybersecurity, a field that was just beginning to explode. We became inseparable, staying up late to code together and discussing business ideas that seemed far-fetched at the time. Despite working 20 hours a week while carrying a full course load, I graduated with honors. My mother's health had deteriorated further by then, with her diabetes causing peripheral neuropathy that made it difficult for her to work. My grandmother had passed away during my junior year, leaving us her modest savings that barely covered funeral expenses. As I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I wasn't just celebrating an academic achievement, I was embracing the responsibility of supporting myself and my mother in the years ahead. Throughout those formative years, my father remained a ghost. No support, no contact, not even a shadow of his presence in my life. I had learned to live without him, but the wound of his abandonment never fully healed. Instead, it hardened into a determination that would fuel my next chapter. With my computer science degree fresh in hand and Amber as my business partner, I took a leap of faith. Instead of seeking traditional employment, we started a small web design business from my dorm room during our final semester. We called it SecureStep, a name that reflected our long-term vision to move beyond websites into security solutions. After graduation, we relocated to Boston, drawn by its growing tech scene and startup-friendly environment. We rented a tiny apartment with a converted dining room that served as our office. The early years were lean and difficult. We lived on ramen noodles and coffee, pouring every spare dollar back into the business. Most nights, I fell asleep with my laptop still open, code filling the screen. While Amber focused on client relations, I immersed myself in developing our technical capabilities. Web design paid the bills, but I spent nights and weekends researching encryption methods and security protocols, convinced this was where our future lay. We lost clients when we couldn't deliver fast enough, gained them back through word of mouth when our quality proved superior. The constant hustle was exhausting but exhilarating. Our breakthrough came 3 years in, when I developed a security software that detected and prevented a specific type of data breach that was plaguing small e-commerce businesses. The timing was perfect. A series of high-profile hacks had made cybersecurity front-page news, and suddenly our phones wouldn't stop ringing. It was at a tech conference in 2014 that I met Dr. Lawrence Chen, a former NSA cryptographer turned venture capitalist. After sitting in on my presentation about encryption vulnerabilities, he invited me to coffee. 2 hours later, he was offering a $500,000 investment in exchange for a 15% stake in SecureStep. The validation from someone of his caliber felt surreal, but more importantly, it gave us the capital to hire our first employees and move into a real office. With funding secured, we pivoted fully into cybersecurity solutions. I developed proprietary software that could identify potential security breaches before they happened, a concept that was revolutionary at the time. Henderson Financial, a mid-sized investment firm, became our first major corporate client after experiencing a costly data breach. They took a chance on our small team, and we delivered beyond their expectations. Their glowing testimonials opened doors to other financial institutions. As our client list grew, so did our team. We expanded to 20 employees within 18 months, carefully selecting talented developers who shared our vision. Our company culture became known for its innovation and inclusivity. I was determined to create opportunities for women in tech, remembering how Amber and I had often been the only females in the room. During this period of growth, my mother's health continued to decline. The stress of managing her care from hundreds of miles away became overwhelming, so I moved her to Boston. I found her an apartment near mine and hired part-time home healthcare to assist when I couldn't be there. The costs were substantial: specialized doctors, medications, treatments not covered by insurance, but for the first time in my life, I could provide for her without financial strain. SecureStep's reputation continued to grow. We were featured in tech industry publications, and I was named to Forbes' 30 Under 30 list, a recognition that brought both pride and increased attention. Our company valuation hit $10 million, then $15 million. I purchased my first home, a 3-bedroom townhouse, where my mother could have her own space while still being close enough for me to check on her. The true game changer came when I developed a proprietary encryption algorithm that dramatically outperformed industry standards in both security and processing speed. Major companies took notice, and suddenly we weren't just serving small to mid-sized businesses. We were fielding calls from Fortune 500 corporations. As our company expanded internationally, opening offices in London and Singapore, our valuation soared. The workload was intense, with 16-hour days becoming my norm. I missed dinners, birthdays, even doctor appointments with my mother. The guilt was constant, but so was the drive to build something significant, something that would ensure neither of us would ever struggle financially again. Then came the offer that would change everything. SecureTech, one of the largest cybersecurity firms in the world, approached us with an acquisition proposal. The initial offer was $50 million, which they eventually raised to $75 million after seeing our projected growth and proprietary technologies. The decision wasn't easy. This company had been my life for nearly a decade, but after ensuring that our employees would be retained and our technologies properly developed, I agreed to the sale. After taxes and disbursements to investors, my personal fortune amounted to approximately $40 million. The financial security was overwhelming for someone who had grown up counting pennies. My first actions were to establish a trust for my mother's lifelong care and to create a charitable foundation focused on supporting women in STEM fields. At 31, I had achieved more financial success than I had ever dreamed possible. I remained with SecureTech in a consulting role, still passionate about the work, but finally able to maintain reasonable hours. I was dating occasionally, considering buying a vacation home and thinking about writing a book about women in technology. Life had become good, stable, fulfilling, and purposeful, which is precisely when my father decided to reappear. The email arrived on an ordinary Tuesday morning. "Madison, it's your father. I've always been so proud of you. Can we talk?" It sat in my inbox for 3 days before I could bring myself to respond. 24 years of silence, and now he was proud. The audacity was stunning. I forwarded the email to Dr. Sarah Mitchell, my therapist of 5 years, before replying. Sarah had helped me process the abandonment issues that had surfaced as my success grew, the persistent feeling that I didn't deserve good things, the difficulty trusting partners, the workaholic tendencies that served as both shield and distraction. Amber's advice was more direct. Delete it. Block him. You don't owe him anything. She remembered the nights in college when I'd confided about checking social media for any trace of him, the birthdays when I'd still harbored that childish hope he might remember. But curiosity is a powerful force. After a week of deliberation, I sent a brief reply. "Why now?" His response came within minutes, as if he'd been waiting by his computer. He claimed he'd been following my career for years, that he'd always wanted to reach out, but felt ashamed that he'd made terrible mistakes but had changed. Each sentence read like a calculated performance. The emails turned to text messages, then to phone calls. Our first conversation was awkward and tense. His voice was familiar, yet strange, deeper than I remembered, with a forced cheerfulness that set my teeth on edge. He asked surface-level questions about my life, speaking as if there had been a brief interruption in our relationship, rather than a 2-decade abandonment. "I tried to send money when I could," he claimed during our second call. "Your mother must have hidden it from you." The accusation against my mother, who had worked herself to the bone to support me, made my blood boil. I nearly ended contact then, but a morbid fascination kept me engaged. I wanted to understand his motives. He mentioned he was living in Connecticut now, just a 2-hour drive from Boston, and suggested meeting in person. Against my better judgment and the advice of both my therapist and Amber, I agreed to coffee. Riverside Coffee Shop, public place, middle of the day. I arrived early, heart-pounding, half expecting him not to show. But he did. Richard Taylor, now 63, still handsome in that conventional way that had charmed my mother years ago. Silver had replaced the brown in his hair, lines had formed around his eyes, but his smile was the same, wide and disarming. He hugged me before I could step back, the scent of expensive cologne invading my space. Over the next hour, he spun elaborate tales of his life after leaving us: adventures abroad, spiritual journeys, business ventures that never quite succeeded due to circumstances beyond his control. He claimed he had tried to contact me many times over the years, but suspected my mother had intercepted his letters and calls. Each lie was delivered with such conviction that I almost questioned my own memories. I sent birthday cards every year. He insisted, watching my reaction carefully. With cash inside, "Did you never get them?" I kept my responses neutral, neither confirming nor denying gathering information. He mentioned his construction business in Hartford was struggling due to the pandemic. He had remarried 15 years ago to a woman named Diane and had taken on raising her son Marcus, now 21. They lived in a modest home, though his watch and car suggested otherwise. As our meeting drew to a close, he casually mentioned reading about my company's acquisition. "That must have been quite a windfall," he said, eyes calculating beneath the proud father facade. "I always knew you were the smart one in the family." Then came the first ask $50,000 to help his business through a temporary cash flow issue, just until things picked up again. He'd pay me back, of course, with interest. It was a family opportunity to help each other out. I told him I'd think about it, watching disappointment flicker across his face. As I drove home, a strange calm settled over me. The mystery of who my father was and why he'd left had been replaced by a transparent reality. Richard Taylor was exactly who my mother had tried to protect me from: understanding a manipulator, a user, a man who saw relationships as transactions. Despite this clarity, he continued his campaign. Texts checking in, emails about family bonds, photos of himself with Diane and Marcus on vacation in Cabo San Lucas contradicting his claims of financial hardship. Then came the escalation, showing up, unannounced, at my office on a Friday afternoon. My receptionist Katie called me an alarm. "There's a man in the lobby claiming to be your father. He doesn't have an appointment, but says it's important." I considered having security remove him, but decided to face him directly. This was my territory, not his. I brought him to my office, introducing him briefly to curious employees we passed. Once the door closed behind us, his demeanor shifted. The request increased to $500,000, a proper family investment in his business. When I refused, his charm evaporated. "You have more money than you could spend in a lifetime," he hissed, the facade crumbling. "You think you're too good for your own family now." "We're not family," I replied quietly. "Family doesn't abandon each other." His expression darkened. "There are other options, Madison. I'd rather keep this between us, but if you force my hand." He left the threat hanging as I showed him out. That night I began researching. Multiple bankruptcies, a trail of failed businesses, fraud allegations that were settled out of court, a gambling addiction documented in a divorce filing from his first wife after my mother, social media posts from other children, 2 daughters, from a relationship between my mother and Diane, claiming he had abandoned them as well. Then came the certified letter from Bradford and Associates, a small law firm in Hartford. It outlined a claim for parental support and family maintenance based on obscure filial responsibility laws. My father was demanding ongoing financial support due to his role in creating the circumstances that led to my success. The letter threatened litigation if I didn't respond with a reasonable support proposal within 10 days. I forwarded the letter to Jessica Ramirez, my corporate attorney who specialized in both business and family law. Her response was immediate. "This is garbage legal theory, but garbage that could still create problems. Let's meet tomorrow." Jessica confirmed what I suspected: the legal claim had virtually no merit, but a lawsuit would be public, potentially embarrassing, and could affect stock prices and client confidence in the company I still consulted for. Richard was banking on a settlement to avoid publicity. A second letter arrived this time, demanding $10 million and threatening to go to the tech press with stories of the heartless daughter who abandoned her struggling father. The irony would have been laughable if it weren't so infuriating. The board at SecureTech expressed concern about potential negative publicity. My mother's health took a downturn, her blood pressure spiking from the stress when I finally had to tell her about Richard's reappearance. As I sat by her hospital bed, watching her fragile form connected to monitors, something hardened in me. This man had already taken too much from us. He would not take more. When his lawyer filed the actual lawsuit attempting to freeze a portion of my assets pending resolution, I stopped all direct communication and fully committed to fighting back. This was no longer about money. It was about standing up to a bully who thought he could discard his responsibilities and return only to collect rewards he hadn't earned. The lawsuit my father filed was breathtaking in its audacity. His legal team, clearly working on contingency with hopes of a big payday, had constructed an alternate reality where Richard Taylor was a loving, supportive father who had maintained constant contact with me throughout my life. According to their filing, he had been instrumental in fostering my interest in technology and had made significant sacrifices to ensure my educational opportunities. The filing claimed he had sent regular child support payments that my mother had misappropriated. It alleged he had attended my college graduation and had provided advice during the formation of my company. Each lie was more outrageous than the last, culminating in the assertion that we had maintained a close relationship until my sudden wealth created a personality change that led me to abandon my loving father in his time of need. Jessica Ramirez arrived at my home the evening after we received the filing. Legal documents spread across my dining room table as we dissected their strategy. He's counting on a few things, Jessica explained, highlighting passages in the complaint. First, that filial responsibility laws will create enough legal ambiguity for a sympathetic judge to consider his claim. Second, that you'll settle quickly to avoid public scrutiny and protect your business reputation. And third, that he's created enough of a false paper trail to survive initial discovery. False paper trail, I asked, feeling nauseated. Jessica nodded grimly. There are exhibits attached birthday cards he supposedly sent phone records, showing calls to a number that wasn't yours, even some obviously photoshopped pictures of him at your college graduation. The scope of his preparation was stunning. This wasn't an impulsive act of greed. It was a calculated long-term strategy. I wondered how long he had been planning this, how many years he had been collecting and fabricating evidence while watching my success from afar. The discovery phase revealed even more. My father claimed to have loaned me $25,000 to start my company money he had supposedly borrowed against his home. Bank records we subpoenaed showed no such transaction, but did reveal he had taken a home equity loan the month before filing the lawsuit. The money had gone directly to a casino in Atlantic City. His total debt, once we had full visibility, exceeded $1.2 million gambling debts, maxed out credit cards, tax liens, and a mortgage underwater by nearly $200,000. Meanwhile, his social media showed vacations, a boat, and his wife's extensive designer wardrobe. He had been living beyond his means for years, creating a financial house of cards that was finally collapsing. More disturbing was his attempt to contact other Secure Step employees seeking damaging information about me. 2 former developers forwarded me messages from him, offering compensation for insights into Madison's character and business practices. He was fishing for anything he could use to pressure me into settling. The lawsuit was beginning to attract attention in tech circles. A reporter from TechWire contacted my PR team seeking comment on the family dispute, threatening one of cybersecurity's rising stars. Competitors whispered to clients about leadership distractions at my former company. SecureTech's stock dipped temporarily after a particularly salacious article appeared in a business tabloid. My father's attorney attempted to schedule a settlement conference, suggesting that $5 million would make the matter disappear quickly and quietly. When Jessica rejected the offer outright, the pressure tactics escalated. Anonymous negative reviews appeared on SecureTech's products. A fake profile in my name popped up on dating sites. The message was clear: this would get uglier before it was resolved. The stress was taking a toll. I lost weight, struggled to sleep, and found myself checking over my shoulder in public places. My mother's condition worsened, requiring a week-long hospitalization when her blood sugar levels became dangerously unstable. Sitting beside her hospital bed, watching her fragile form beneath sterile white sheets, I felt a surge of both guilt and resolve. This was my battle to fight, not hers yet. She was suffering the consequences. My determination crystallized during that hospital vigil. This wasn't just about protecting my assets, it was about standing up to a manipulator who had walked away from his responsibilities and returned only when there was something to gain. It was about defending my mother who had sacrificed everything for me. And it was about confronting the ghost who had haunted the edges of my life for 24 years. I instructed Jessica to prepare for trial with no further discussion of settlement. If Richard Taylor wanted a public spectacle, I would give him one, just not the kind he was expecting. With trial set for 3 months away, Jessica Ramirez assembled a formidable legal team. Beyond herself as lead counsel, she brought in a family law specialist, a forensic accountant, and a private investigator with experience in fraud cases. Our strategy sessions took place in the conference room of her firm's Boston office walls, covered with timelines and evidence boards. The core of our defense is simple, Jessica explained during our first full team meeting. Your father cannot claim entitlement to the fruits of a relationship he deliberately abandoned, but we need to methodically dismantle each of his fabricated claims with irrefutable evidence. Our first task was documenting my father's absence throughout my childhood. We gathered school records, showing my mother as the only parent attending teacher conferences and school events. My elementary school principal, now retired, provided a written statement confirming she had never met my father despite my mother's regular involvement. My high school guidance counselor did the same. Financial records told their own story. My mother's tax returns filed as head of household for years showed no child support received. Bank statements confirmed her multiple jobs and modest income. Medical bills demonstrated she had been solely responsible for my health care, often making payment arrangements when insurance didn't cover everything. Among the most powerful evidence were my childhood journals. I had kept them from age 10 through high school, storing them in my grandmother's attic and later retrieving them after her death. The entries were heartbreaking in their childish honesty. Today was my birthday. Mom got me a cake and Grandma Eleanor gave me a science kit. I still checked the mail for a card from Dad. Nothing again this year. Graduation tomorrow. Mom worked extra shifts to buy me a nice dress. I wonder if Dad knows I'm valedictorian. Probably not. Probably doesn't care. We uncovered records of my mother's attempts to enforce the child support order letters to the state enforcement agency responses, saying they couldn't locate my father. Jessica found court transcripts from the original divorce proceedings where the judge had noted his failure to appear despite proper service. Our investigation took an unexpected turn when the private investigator discovered my father had other abandoned children. Through social media searches and court records, we located two half-sisters. I hadn't known existed daughters from a relationship after he left my mother, but before his current marriage. Heather and Trisha Nelson, now 22 and 20, had been abandoned by him when they were 6 and 4. Their mother, Karen Nelson, was eager to testify about his pattern of behavior. He stayed until Trisha was walking, then cleaned out our accounts while I was visiting my parents with the girls, Karen told us during a video call. Claimed he was going on a business trip. Left a note saying he wasn't cut out for family life. Sound familiar? The financial investigation yielded equally damning evidence. While claiming poverty in his court filings, my father had made substantial purchases in the months before filing the lawsuit: a boat, a luxury watch, a timeshare in Florida. Casino records, subpoenaed by our team, showed gambling losses exceeding $180 0 inches the previous year alone. Perhaps most disturbing was the discovery that my father had been living just 30 miles from my mother and me for 15 of the 24 years he had been absent. While claiming in court documents that he had been finding himself abroad, he had actually been living in a neighboring county, even attending local sporting events at a stadium less than 10 miles from my childhood home. We also uncovered evidence that contradicted his claim of fostering my interest in technology. My first computer had been purchased with money I earned from babysitting, supplemented by a contribution from my grandmother. The receipt, which my mother had kept for warranty purposes, was still in her files. My coding classes had been paid for by a scholarship program for low-income students. The application filled out in my mother's handwriting specified single-parent household. To counter his assertion that he had contributed to my business success, we compiled complete financial records for SecureStep's founding and growth. Every investment loan and revenue source was documented, creating an unbroken chain of capital that clearly showed no contribution from Richard Taylor. Dr. Lawrence Chen provided a statement about his early investment and his first meeting with me, confirming he had never heard me mention my father. As the trial date approached, we discovered perhaps the most shocking evidence of all. My father had attempted to sabotage my business by contacting several of our key investors, claiming to have insider knowledge about fraudulent practices at SecureStep. Emails obtained through discovery showed he had reached out to at least 3 major investors in the months before SecureTech's acquisition offer, perhaps hoping to devalue the company before making his claim on my assets. The night before the hearing, I sat alone in my home office reviewing the timeline of events we had constructed. 24 years of my father's calculated absence, followed by his equally calculated return once I had achieved financial success. The evidence painted a picture not of a parent seeking reconciliation, but of a predator targeting a source of wealth. My mother had been moved to a skilled nursing facility temporarily, her health too fragile for her to attend court. I visited her that evening, finding her dozing in her adjustable bed, medical monitors beeping softly beside her. "You don't have to do this," she whispered when she woke to find me there. "We could just pay him something to make him go away." I took her hand, thin and papery, in mine and shook my head. "No, Mom. He walked away from his responsibilities. I won't reward that. Not after everything you sacrificed." She squeezed my hand weakly. "I'm proud of you, Maddie. No matter what happens tomorrow." I kissed her forehead and left, stopping in the hallway to compose myself before driving home. The next morning, I dressed carefully in a conservative navy suit, applied minimal makeup, and pulled my hair back into a simple ponytail. This wasn't about intimidation or power plays, it was about truth. And after 24 years, I was finally ready to speak mine. The Suffolk County Courthouse stood imposingly in downtown Boston, its neoclassical columns and broad stone steps projecting an aura of authority and tradition. I arrived early with Jessica and our legal team passing through security and making our way to courtroom 306, where Judge Catherine Reynolds would preside over the hearing. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined, from TV shows and movies intimate enough that everyone would be able to hear each nuance of testimony without microphones. The wood paneling gleamed under fluorescent lights, and the Massachusetts state flag hung beside the American flag behind the judge's bench. My father arrived 15 minutes later, flanked by his attorney Bradley Winters, a sharp-featured man in an expensive suit and a younger man I recognized from social media as my stepbrother Marcus. My father's wife Diane followed behind them, her blonde hair perfectly styled, wearing a cream-colored designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. The contradiction between their appearances and their claims of financial hardship was striking. My mother had insisted on attending despite her health. I had arranged for a private nurse to accompany her, and they entered just before proceedings began, my mother in a wheelchair with an IV pole attached. Her presence sent a visible jolt through my father, who quickly looked away when she met his eyes directly for the first time in decades. At precisely 9:00 a.m., the bailiff called for all to rise as Judge Catherine Reynolds entered the courtroom. In her late 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair and penetrating brown eyes, she carried herself with a quiet authority as she took her seat and reviewed the files before her. "We are here in the matter of Taylor versus Taylor." She began, looking up at both parties. "Before we proceed, I want to make it clear that this courtroom will maintain proper decorum at all times. This appears to be a family matter with significant personal elements, but I expect all parties to conduct themselves professionally." Her gaze lingered slightly longer on my father's side of the courtroom. Bradley Winters presented their case, first rising dramatically and buttoning his suit jacket before approaching the podium. His opening statement painted a heartbreaking portrait of a devoted father who had made painful sacrifices for his daughter's future. "Your Honor, this case is about family responsibility and recognition of parental contribution," Winters began. "Richard Taylor made difficult choices throughout his life, including periods of absence that were mischaracterized as abandonment, when in fact he was working tirelessly to establish financial security for his family." The fiction continued to build as Winters claimed my father had maintained consistent contact with me throughout my life, had guided my educational choices, and had provided critical early support for my business ventures. According to this alternate reality, I had been a loving daughter until my sudden wealth had changed me, causing me to reject the very father who had sacrificed everything for my success. Mr. Taylor is not seeking his daughter's entire fortune, as some media reports have sensationalized, Winters concluded. He is seeking a reasonable acknowledgement, just 10% of the wealth that would not exist without his parental influence and support. It is a matter of both moral and legal obligation under Massachusetts filial responsibility statutes. Jessica Ramirez then delivered our opening statement, her approach methodical and measured in contrast to Winters' theatrical presentation. She laid out a simple timeline of my life, highlighting my mother's consistent presence and my father's documented absence. "Your Honor, this case is not about family responsibility. It's about the absence of it," she began. "The evidence will show that Richard Taylor abandoned his wife and 8-year-old daughter, taking their life savings and disappearing without a trace. He provided no child support, no birthday cards, no phone calls, and no participation in Madison Taylor's life for 24 years. Jessica emphasized my journey from a struggling single-parent household to business success through hard work, education, and personal sacrifice, directly refuting the notion that my father had contributed in any way. She cited the specific legal precedents that made his claim invalid, pointing out that filial responsibility laws were designed to protect elderly parents who had fulfilled their parental obligations, not those who had abandoned them. The plaintiff's sudden interest in his daughter's life coincided precisely with public announcements of her company's successful acquisition, Jessica concluded. The timing is not coincidental, and the court should recognize this lawsuit for what it is, an opportunistic attempt to profit from a relationship that the plaintiff himself deliberately destroyed. Judge Reynolds listened intently to both sides, Before instructing the attorneys to call their first witnesses, my father took the stand first, presenting a carefully crafted image of paternal devotion. In a voice occasionally breaking with emotion, he described his agonizing decision to leave our family temporarily to pursue better job opportunities. "I never intended to be gone so long," he testified, dabbing at his eyes with a handkerchief. "But life kept throwing obstacles in my path. I sent money whenever I could, birthday cards every year. I called on holidays but often got no answer." He claimed to have attended my high school graduation, sitting in the back so as not to disrupt the event, and to have followed my career through news articles and social media. According to his testimony, we had reconnected briefly during my college years, but had drifted apart when my business began to take off. "All I'm asking for is fair recognition of my role as her father," he concluded, looking directly at me. "I'm proud of Madison. I just want to be part of her life again and, yes, to receive some acknowledgement of my contribution to her success." Under Jessica's cross-examination, the first cracks began to appear in his performance. When pressed for specific details about my childhood, my favorite subjects in school, allergies, friends' names, he fumbled, offering vague responses that could apply to any child. When Jessica produced my school records, showing my mother as the only parent attending events he claimed, he had been working to support the family. "And how exactly were you supporting the family during this time, Mr. Taylor?" Jessica asked. "Bank records show no payments to your ex-wife or daughter from the time you left until the present day." "I sent cash," she insisted. "I didn't trust the banking system." "Cash that was never received," Jessica countered. How convenient that there would be no record. As cross-examination continued, Jessica methodically led my father through a series of contradictions between his testimony and documented evidence. His claims about attending my college graduation fell apart when she produced the complete attendance records and security footage from the ceremony, showing no sign of his presence. His assertion that he had provided startup funding for my company collapsed when confronted with the complete financial history showing every source of capital. The most damaging moment came when Jessica presented evidence of his gambling history, including casino records, showing he had been gambling in Atlantic City on the dates of several major events in my life, including my high school graduation and college commencement. "Mr. Taylor, how could you have been sitting in the back of Madison's graduation when you were documented as being at the Borgata Casino in Atlantic City on that exact date?" Jessica asked, displaying his player's card activity on the courtroom screen. His composed facade crumbled. "Those records must be incorrect," he stammered, looking to his attorney for help. The testimony from my father's financial advisor, subpoenaed, reluctantly revealed that Richard had hidden assets in multiple accounts and had recently liquidated investments worth nearly $300,000, contradicting his claims of financial hardship. The advisor confirmed that Richard had specifically asked about the enforceability of filial responsibility laws months before contacting me, suggesting premeditation. Marcus, my stepbrother, was called to testify about my father's financial situation. Clearly uncomfortable on the stand, he reluctantly confirmed that the family had taken multiple luxury vacations in the past year, including trips to Cabo, San Lucas, and the Bahamas. Under careful questioning from Jessica, he admitted that my father had purchased a boat and a new car shortly before claiming financial distress. He said it was important to look successful, Marcus testified, avoiding my father's glare from the plaintiff's table, even when the construction business was struggling. By the lunch recess, Judge Reynolds' expression had shifted from neutral to increasingly skeptical of my father's claims. She had interrupted his attorney several times to question inconsistencies in their evidence, particularly regarding the timeline of events and the sudden appearance of birthday cards and phone records that no one else could corroborate. The most explosive testimony before the break came from a casino manager who testified about my father's gambling habits, including losses exceeding $180 0 inches the previous year alone. Records showed he had been at the casino the very day his attorney had sent the first demand letter to me, wagering thousands of dollars while claiming poverty. When the judge called for the lunch recess, my father's confident demeanor had vanished. He huddled with his attorney in urgent conversation, occasionally glancing in my direction with an expression that had shifted from righteous indignation to something closer to fear. As we left the courtroom, Jessica squeezed my arm reassuringly. "It's going well," she said quietly. Your testimony this afternoon will be crucial, but we've already exposed the major holes in his case. I nodded, stealing a glance at my mother being wheeled toward the courthouse cafeteria by her nurse. Her face was pale, but determined, her eyes following my father with a mixture of sadness and resolve. For her sake as much as my own, I needed to finish this. When court reconvened after lunch, the mood had shifted perceptibly. Judge Reynolds' questions to my father's attorney had become more pointed, and the gallery had filled with additional spectators as word spread about the contentious testimony from the morning session. A court sketch artist had appeared, capturing the scene with swift, decisive strokes of charcoal. The defense calls Madison Taylor Jessica announced as soon as the judge indicated we should proceed. I rose and walked to the witness stand, the weight of 2 decades of unspoken truth pressing on my chest. After being sworn in, I settled into the wooden chair, adjusted the microphone, and faced the courtroom directly. My father avoided my gaze, suddenly fascinated by his legal pad. Jessica began with basic background questions, establishing my childhood in Mapleton, my education, and my career path. Her approach was conversational but precise, creating a clear timeline of my life. "Miss Taylor, could you describe your living situation after your father left when you were 8 years old?" she asked. "My mother and I lived in the small house she had inherited from her parents," I replied, my voice steady. "After my father left taking our savings, my mother had to work multiple jobs to keep us afloat. She cleaned houses on weekends, took extra shifts at the hardware store, and later worked nights at a nursing home when I was old enough to stay home alone." "And did your father provide child support during this time?" "No, not a dollar." I kept my tone neutral, stating facts rather than emotion. "My mother filed for child support through the courts, but he couldn't be located to serve the papers. Later, when the order was granted by default, no payments ever came." "Did your father maintain contact with you after he left?" "None whatsoever. No calls, no letters, no birthday cards." I glanced briefly at my father, who was still studying his legal pad. "My mother tried to locate him through friends and family for the first few years, but no one knew where he was, or if they did, they wouldn't say." Jessica guided me through the financial hardships of my childhood, the secondhand clothes, the free lunch program at school, the scholarships and part-time jobs that had financed my education. I described working at age 12, mowing lawns and babysitting to help with household expenses when my mother's health began to decline. "I'd like to introduce Exhibit 42, Jessica said, presenting a journal with a faded blue cover. "Miss Taylor, can you identify this?" "Yes, this is my journal from when I was 10 years old." I paged through it briefly, recognizing my childish handwriting. "Would you read the entry from October 15th, which would have been your 10th birthday? I found the page and read, "Today is my birthday. Mom made my favorite chocolate cake, even though I know sugar is expensive right now. Grandma Eleanor gave me a science kit. I checked the mail 3 times, but there was nothing from Dad again this year." Similar entries followed holidays, school achievements, ordinary days marked by my father's absence. Each reading landed with quiet impact in the hushed courtroom. By the time we reached my high school graduation entry, my mother was quietly crying, and even the court reporter had paused briefly to compose herself. Jessica then walked me through my college experience and the founding of my company, establishing through detailed financial records that every penny had been accounted for through documented sources, scholarships, student loans, legitimate investments, and business revenue. There was no mysterious cash from a father figure, no parental guidance, no support of any kind. "Miss Taylor, during your company's growth period, did your father ever contact you to offer advice or support?" "Never," I replied. "The first contact I received from him was an email last year after news of the company acquisition had been made public. We presented the actual email thread showing his first contact and subsequent messages, highlighting the increasingly direct references to my financial success and his escalating requests for money. Then came the most powerful portion of my testimony. Jessica had saved the most damning revelation for this moment, knowing its potential impact. "Miss Taylor, when did you discover your father had been living just 30 miles from your childhood home for 15 years of his absence?" A murmur ran through the courtroom. My father's head snapped up, his expression stricken. "During our preparation for this case, I answered, my voice tight with controlled emotion. Our investigator discovered that while my father claimed to be finding himself abroad or working in distant states, he had actually been living in Westville, just 30 miles from Mapleton, from the time I was 17 until about 3 years ago. Jessica displayed property records, tax filings, and employment history, confirming his residence in neighboring Westville County from 2009 to 2021. During this time, did he ever attempt to contact you or your mother? Never. Not once. I looked directly at my father now. He was close enough to attend every high school event my graduation to see me when I came home from college on breaks. He could have driven 30 minutes to check on his daughter any day for 15 years. He chose not to. My father whispered urgently to his attorney, who rose to object. Your Honor, these records weren't included in the original discovery. They were submitted in the supplemental filing last week. Counsel Judge Reynolds replied coolly. Perhaps you should review your documents more carefully. The objection is overruled. Continue, Ms. Ramirez. Jessica then revealed additional evidence, bank records, showing my father had emptied joint accounts totaling nearly $12,000 before leaving, contradicting his claim that he had left to earn money for the family. We presented medical records documenting my mother's health conditions that were exacerbated by the stress and physical toll of supporting us alone. The most shocking revelation came last. Through discovery, we had uncovered emails showing my father had contacted several major investors during SecureStep's growth phase, attempting to dissuade them from further investment by suggesting financial irregularities in the company. Ms. Taylor, what do you make of your father's attempts to undermine your business while you were unaware of his existence, only to later claim he contributed to your success? Jessica asked. I took a deep breath, looking directly at my father for the first time during my testimony. It shows this was never about family. This was about money taking it, when I had none as a child, trying to prevent me from earning it as an adult and demanding it once I'd succeeded despite his best efforts. My father's attorney cross-examined me, aggressively attempting to suggest I had known of my father's attempts to contact me but had deliberately ignored them. He questioned whether my mother might have intercepted communications, implying she had poisoned me against my father. Each insinuation fell flat against the documented timeline and evidence we had presented. As the cross-examination grew more desperate, Judge Reynolds intervened several times, instructing the attorney to keep his questions relevant to the legal claim at hand, rather than engaging in character attacks. When he attempted to suggest my success was due to inherited intellect from my father, the judge cut him off entirely. Counsel, unless you can produce evidence of your client's direct contribution to Miss Taylor's education, or business, financial, or otherwise, this line of questioning is irrelevant and borders on harassment, she stated firmly. When the attorney had no further questions, Jessica asked for permission to allow one final statement from me. Judge Reynolds nodded her approval. I turned slightly in the witness chair, addressing my words directly to my father rather than the court. You abandoned us when we had nothing. You're only here because now I have something you want. That's not fatherhood. That's not family. That's opportunism. The courtroom fell completely silent. My father, for perhaps the first time in his life, had no response. Judge Reynolds, her expression grave, called for a 15-minute recess before closing arguments. As I stepped down from the witness stand, my legs trembling slightly from the emotional exertion, I caught my mother's eye. She reached out her hand as I passed, squeezing mine with surprising strength. In that moment, I knew that whatever the judge decided, we had already won the more important victory. The truth had finally been spoken aloud after 24 years of silence. After brief closing arguments from both attorneys, Judge Reynolds recessed court to review the evidence. She returned just 30 minutes later, suggesting she had already reached her decision before leaving the bench. Having carefully considered the evidence presented in this case, she began, her voice clear and authoritative. I find the plaintiff's claim for filial support to be without merit and dismiss it in its entirety. My shoulders relaxed as she continued, addressing my father directly. Mr. Taylor, filial responsibility laws were designed to protect parents who fulfilled their parental obligations throughout their children's lives and find themselves in need during their elder years. They were not created as a mechanism for parents who abandoned their responsibilities to claim a share of their children's success. She shuffled the papers before her, then delivered a pointed rebuke that left no room for misinterpretation. The court finds the plaintiff's claim not only legally baseless, but morally reprehensible. The evidence clearly establishes that you abandoned your minor child and her mother, taking their financial resources and providing no support, financial, emotional, or otherwise, for 24 years. You made no attempt to contact your daughter until after her financial success became public knowledge. Your testimony regarding attempts to maintain contact was directly contradicted by substantial documentary evidence. The judge looked at my father over her reading glasses. Furthermore, this court is deeply disturbed by evidence showing you actively attempted to undermine your daughter's business success before later claiming entitlement to the fruits of that success. Such behavior suggests this lawsuit was motivated not by genuine familial concern, but by opportunistic financial interest. She then addressed the matter of legal fees, ordering my father to pay all costs associated with the defense against his frivolous and vexatious litigation. She further indicated she would refer his attorney to the Bar Association for potential ethical violations related to the submission of apparently falsified evidence. This case is dismissed with prejudice. Court is adjourned. With a sharp rap of her gavel, it was over. My father left the courtroom quickly, avoiding reporters gathered outside. His wife Diane followed her expression thunderous. Only Marcus hesitated, catching my eye briefly with what looked like an apologetic glance before hurrying after them. The aftermath unfolded rapidly. Local media covered the case extensively, most reports sympathetic to my position after the evidence became public record. My father attempted to contact me once more through a lengthy email, claiming he had been misunderstood and suggesting we start fresh for the sake of family. I did not respond. A week later, the court issued a follow-up ruling ordering my father to pay over $300, 0 inches legal fees and court costs. His attorney filed an appeal, but withdrew it within days, perhaps recognizing the futility of further proceedings, given the overwhelming evidence against their position. My mother's health began to improve once the stress of the case was lifted. We celebrated with a small dinner at her favorite restaurant, joined by Jessica and Amber. It was the first time I had seen her laugh freely in months, her face animated as she recounted the judge's expression during my testimony. "I knew you could handle yourself," she said, squeezing my hand across the table. "But watching you stand up to him like that with such dignity and strength, it was something I'll never forget." I declined most interview requests, but agreed to one carefully selected conversation with a respected business publication. Rather than focusing on the drama of the lawsuit, I used the opportunity to discuss the challenges faced by children of single parents and the importance of supporting women entrepreneurs from diverse backgrounds. The experience prompted me to expand my foundation's work, establishing a new scholarship specifically for children raised in single-parent households. The first recipients would begin their education the following fall, pursuing degrees in technology fields with full financial support and mentorship opportunities. My father's construction business filed for bankruptcy protection 3 months after the trial. According to local business news, he and Diane relocated to Florida shortly thereafter. Marcus, I learned through a brief LinkedIn message, had distanced himself from his stepfather and was pursuing a degree in social work, a choice I quietly admired. Professionally, I found new purpose. After the acquisition, I had continued consulting with Secure Tech, but had felt somewhat adrift without a clear mission. The lawsuit had rekindled my passion for building something meaningful. I began developing a new venture focused on using technology to connect vulnerable populations with legal resources, inspired in part by the realization that many single parents, like my mother, lacked access to the legal support they needed. The experience also transformed my perspective on family. The legal battle had painfully demonstrated the difference between biological connections and true family bonds. I found myself appreciating more deeply the chosen family I had built: Amber, who had stood by me from our college days; Jessica, whose fierce advocacy had transcended professional obligation; Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who had helped me process the complex emotions surrounding my father's reappearance; and of course, my mother, whose unwavering love and sacrifice had shaped the person I had become. 6 months after the trial, I purchased a vacation home in coastal Maine, a rambling house with enough rooms for friends and family to visit. My mother was the first guest, spending a week by the ocean as her health continued to improve. Watching her walk along the shore, her steps stronger than they had been in years, I felt a sense of completion. I had faced the ghost that had haunted the edges of my life for 24 years. And emerged stronger for the confrontation. The 8-year-old girl who had watched her father walk away, the teenager who had checked the mail for birthday cards that never came, the young woman who had built a business while caring for her mother. All those versions of myself had finally received the validation they deserved. The truth had been spoken, acknowledged, and recorded. My worth had never been determined by my father's absence, just as my success had never depended on his approval. In standing up for myself, I had also stood up for my mother, and for anyone who had ever been abandoned and blamed themselves. If there's one lesson I've learned through this journey, it's that family isn't defined by biology or legal obligation. It's defined by love, presence, and sacrifice. The people who stand by you when you have nothing are your true family. Those who appear only when you have something to offer are simply opportunists. I'm sharing this story not for sympathy or vindication, but because I know there are others out there carrying similar wounds, questioning their worth because someone who should have loved them walked away. Your value was never diminished by their absence. Your success belongs to you and those who supported your journey, not to those who abandoned their responsibilities. What about you? How do you define family in your life? Is it based on biology, or have you created your own chosen family of supportive people? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If my story resonated with you in any way, please consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who might need to hear this message. Thank you for being part of this community where we can share our truths and grow stronger together.